Richard Feynman could remember equations he had read 30 years earlier and pull them out of his head like a man reaching into a kitchen drawer. In 1965, colleagues at Caltech watched him work out a problem from scratch with no notes or reference book. And here's the strange part. His brain held nothing special. He did not even score higher on IQ tests than his colleagues. What he had were 5 quiet habits. The first is to teach it like a 12-year-old. In the early 1950s, Feynman taught physics in Brazil, and his students stunned him. They could recite Newton's laws word for word, but ask what those laws meant in the real world, and you got blank stares. Feynman called this fragile knowledge, facts that live in your head but shatter the moment somebody presses on them. So take what you just learned and explain it aloud, in plain words, to an imaginary 12-year-old with zero patience for jargon. The second you stumble or reach for a phrase you do not truly understand, that is the gap. That is where your knowledge ends and your bluffing begins. It works because the brain remembers what it produces, not what it consumes. Listening leaves a faint trace, like a footprint in wet sand. Speaking cuts the idea into stone. Researchers showed this in 2014. One group studied a passage expecting a test, another expecting to teach. The teaching group remembered about 28% more. Though no teaching ever happened, the expectation alone changed how their brains encoded it. The second habit lived in a leather notebook, found after his death, and titled, "Notebook of Things I Don't Know About." For decades, he had written down every confusion, every concept that did not quite click, then returned to rebuild his understanding. Most adults do the opposite. They keep notebooks of what they already know, which looks productive and teaches the brain nothing. A muscle never grows by lifting a weight it can already lift, and brains work the same way. That small ache of, "I don't quite get this yet," is what wakes up learning. So write down the questions rather than the answers, and once a week pick one and dig into it until you could teach it to that 12-year-old. The brain holds tight to whatever it had to fight for and discards whatever came easily. The third habit is the 12 favorite problems. Feynman kept a dozen big questions in his head at all times, real obsessions he turned over while shaving or waiting for coffee. Whenever something new arrived, a study, a quote, a statistic on the radio, he tested it against his 12. Does this shed light on any of them? When the answer is yes, he wrote, the world thinks you are a genius. Researchers call this elaborative encoding. The brain keeps information far longer when it connects to something you already care about. So write down a handful of questions you privately wish you understood better and reread it each Sunday. Without questions, the brain has no shelves for new things. The fourth habit is to rebuild from scratch. When Feynman wanted to understand something, he closed the book, took a blank sheet, and reconstructed the whole concept. Equations, examples, logic, history. Rereading feels like learning, but by the third pass, your eyes glide and your mind drifts, and familiarity creates the illusion of understanding. In one 2011 study, students who reread material scored about 30% on a later test. Those who wrote the main ideas from memory scored over 50. So after a chapter, close it and write the key idea in your own words. You will fail at first, and that failure is the point. What you build, you keep. What you only read, you rent. The fifth habit is play, and without it the other four do not hold. In the late 1940s, Feynman was burned out at Cornell, crushed by the pressure of being called a genius. One afternoon in the cafeteria, a student tossed a plate in the air, and Feynman noticed it wobbled at a different rate than it spun. For no good reason at all, he spent weeks working out the mathematics of spinning plates. Out of that ridiculous little game came the work that won him the Nobel Prize. The brain does not encode boring information. You can grind through a textbook for 10 hours and retain almost nothing, yet still quote a film you saw once 20 years ago. The difference is not intelligence or willpower, It is emotion, curiosity, surprise, amusement, which flood the brain with chemicals that work like glue for memory. So find the angle that makes the material fun and treat every subject like a toy, not a chore. Most adults stop playing around 40, which is also when they start saying their memory is fading. Boredom forgets. Wonder remembers. 5 habits then. No apps, no genius IQ required. Just a notebook, a pen, and 10 quiet minutes a day. The only real difference between you and Feynman is permission. To teach badly at first, to admit what you do not know, and to play with ideas like a child.